Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Atomic Podcast. I could not be more excited and privileged to really greet one of the most remarkable neuroscientists of our time. And in fact, I think she's a bit out of time. She is Julia Mossbridge. Dr. Mossbridge has a very illustrious background, but I want to say background is something where she's actually paved a way for us to think about consciousness really outside of the skull, outside of the brain, and understand that consciousness is something that is much more distributed, but also something that is really part of the physics of the universe and part of the physics of who we are, how we love, how we engender trust, how we actually create the ground for well-being. She's worked across AI. She's both been very creative, but also very, very rigorous scientist. And I'd like to turn it over to you, Julia, because like we were talking about before we started, your background is so remarkable, but it is your background. So maybe you can give a little bit more flavor of some of the paths that you're on and some of the paths that you are leading, and then we can kind of move from there. Thank you.
I'm gonna ask you to introduce me at every event ever. That introduction is the best introduction I've ever received. Thank you so much. It's like you see into my soul the best version of myself. And thank you. That's wonderful. What could I possibly add? Um, people talk about um, what they do. Like, I do this and I do this, and I was trained in this and all that. And you kind of covered that. Um, I think the only missing ingredient um, is for anyone to know that none of it is under my control. Like, this is where I find myself. So when people ask me, well, how did you get from, you know, being kind of a competitive neuroscience student at tier one research universities to becoming someone who could give a flying frig about what mainstream neuroscience thinks. Um, that was done to me by the universe, a loving universe, as far as I can tell. But I did not know I was on that road. And and I think that's really important because we all kind of find ourselves like that, right? Like if you think of all the things that have happened to you that really made you who you are, there are often things that you might be grateful that they happened, but are often just out of your control. Like meeting a partner or getting a particular job or losing a particular job that ends up being a good idea and you lost that job. So a lot of it is not in our control. So we sort of in our culture talk a lot about self-made people, and that just doesn't exist. It's just not really true, you know. So I think that's the missing piece.
Yeah, fantastic. And I want to touch on that today more about the sort of tried and true, cognitive neuroscience track and the track that you ended up finding and found you. And I think that's gonna be woven through today. I want to ask a question because I think one of the things that we're going to talk about today is your new book. Have a nice disclosure. And so there's two things in your book you talk about. One is what nice means, but certainly what disclosure means. So maybe for our audience, like why have a nice disclosure and what is the process of disclosure?
Right. Well, that's such a key question right now. Why disclosure? Right now, we're in a time where there's so much information shared around the world about everything. And there's a feeling that among people who study fringe or edge, I like to call them edge, like cutting edge science and
Mhm.
technology, there's often a feeling of like, well, there's information that's available, but that's not being disclosed to us. So there's like a group of people that have this information, and that's them. And then there's people that it's not being disclosed to, and it's us. And if only they would disclose the information to us, then we could have, free energy, or we could um, have peace on earth, or whatever it is. And I do think there's some of that going on there. Obviously, um, for most of the world's population isn't as powerful as the top 1% of the population, um, by nature of that equation. But there's this other piece of disclosure that comes from inside that we can actually pursue. It's the part that we do have control over. And that's the part that no one can stop us from doing. So it feels really radical. It's sort of like turning it on its head. Instead of saying there's us and them and they have to disclose to us and we're mad because they're not disclosing to us. It's like saying, how can I access from inside myself this information that can change my life and maybe can change other people's lives without permission, without maybe without any external obvious clue that you're doing it. It's not like you're going to a secret place on the internet. It's not external. It's through your own consciousness. It's through your own capacity to tap into information. That is your birthright. And so it's a real radical sort of replacement of the human soul at the center of disclosure. There's a lot of talk about that right now, disclosure, partly because of the UAP world in the last, I guess, 10 or 20 years. UAP is the new name for UFOs. Um, it's been really heated up. There's this idea of, well, if you would just disclose information, or now with Jeffrey Epstein, if you would just disclose this information, or with JFK files, if they would just disclose the information. And I'm just saying it's a setup. Even if the government or whomever or some corporation or some billionaire comes out with the information, people wouldn't believe it. So it's not like disclosure of that sort of us versus them type actually leads to the changes that we're looking for. But this other type of disclosure, this nice disclosure, this have a nice disclosure way of doing things is a way to turn it on its head and say, if we're really seeking something beautiful, if we're really seeking harmony, if we're really seeking a change in our culture and in ourselves, well, there's a way towards that. And it's actually known. And it can be known to you through this inner space that connects to everything.
And I think that that is the one thread that I found in your book. I want to ask you something about the way you wrote this book too, but is that I took disclosure not as information from the outside that you learn and bring inside, but it's something that emerges from within. I saw this as a self-discovery, and you leave a lot of things open about that self-discovery so people can continue on their own journey. I
Yeah.
thought that was great. So I want to ask you about the book itself. And my interpretation of that idea of disclosure as self discovery was not only something that you provided ideas about, but the very nature of the way you wrote the book seems like it's a demonstration of that discovery process. Was that intentional or did that just happen?
There's nothing more gratifying than writing a book and having people get it right off the bat. It's a short book and it's weird. And the fact that you got that just like, oh, it makes me so happy. That's exactly right. So it's meant to be the process of disclosure. It's like a verb, not a noun. It's not
Mm.
telling you stuff, it's bringing you through it.
Yeah, I really felt that, and I also felt that, and read through that you wrote this. I won't say against peer review scientific articles, but as a way, a different way to communicate. So I'm sure you've had your successes there. You've written extensively, scientifically. So why did you choose this? Did it just come to you? Of course it did, but you're writing in a mode that most scientists never would.
Yes. Well, I have this capacity, and I believe everyone has the capacity, but for some reason I'm able to express this capacity in the other capacity. So I have this capacity of being very intuitive and not having to put all of my thoughts on some kind of a scale to determine, whether they pass peer review. And then I have the capacity to be very analytical and think as I'm writing, okay, I'm writing a scientific article. So what's my evidence for this? And does this really mean this? And I better check those calculations. And I can do that too. So I can do both of those well. And I don't know why that is. Probably some kind of brain damage. But anyway, I'm able to do both of those well. And it really gives me delight and pleasure to to be a scientist who can do both well, but just to say, this is what I think is true. And this is not a scholarly work. I'm not telling you that this is empirically true and that, you should trust that this is scientifically accurate. I'm opening up doors and saying, what if it were like this? Like when I talk about the physics of love, we don't know what the physics of love is. I for sure don't know what the physics of love is, but I have these ideas and they kind of open up doors. But I'm not about, in that book anyway, I'm not about claiming that any of it is right. It's more like, how do you play with ideas in a way that gives people permission to play with ideas? And 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 it's starting to work. I mean, it's only been out for a few days, but I've already received several emails and texts from, friends and people who have my email and text number saying, I feel more playful. I feel creative. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. This is the humanity that we miss when we immerse ourselves in that version of AI that's all about, well, let's find the right answer, right? Let's find out, are you 90% correct or 100% correct? How about zero? How about like the correctness isn't the issue? The issue is, can you actually move truthfully inside yourself towards a discovery that only you can make?
I
So,
think that's so important because as you see more and more, whether it's OpenAI's ChatGPT or Gemini or so forth, Anthropic, is that you find that there is a real sense that whatever you're getting back from a prompt has a level of engagement and confidence,
yeah,
right?
it's so confident. And then when you point
So,
out that it's wrong and it's like, oh, you're right, I'm wrong. Must be this.
I,
Well, no.
yeah,
Oh,
exactly, exactly. So we're living in that world of kind of fake confidence or
yeah.
confidence that needs to be verified. But nonetheless, we have to be those people that understand that being precise isn't necessarily being creative,
Yeah.
and being correct actually closes the door to creativity.
Yeah.
I understand. I want to ask you another question, which is that you mentioned a theory of punctuated equilibria, um, and from an evolutionary standpoint. And I wanted to have a sense, like as you go, as one might go through this disclosure process, right? Um, what are you anticipating in terms of people's own self-discovery that you're experiencing now through your institute and other types of activities? Are you seeing that people are reaching that sort of peak where they're able to move on more quickly? I don't know how to sort of frame this. It could be, I could frame it socially, I could frame it sort of individually or psychically and so forth. But how are you seeing, based on the vastness of your work, people being able to sort of access that sort of point of equilibria that is at that level?
Yeah.
I know it's a painful process. I mean, it can be, and it usually is. But do you think your book serves as a way towards that direction?
Well, first of all, thanks for calling my work vast. Once again. um, yeah, that's quite an honor for you to say that. Um,
I'm going to
but
break in. I'm calling your work fast because it has the potentiality, not only the amount. And there's a lot of work that has a lot of volumes to it, but it doesn't have potentiality.
well, thank you.
That's very, very different. One's a lake that's filled with rocks, and the other is an ocean
Yeah.
that we don't know the bottom of. So
Ooh, yeah. Yeah. We could go scuba diving.
we can go scuba diving soon.
Yeah. At least snorkeling. Um, so the way I think of it is, so first of all, I didn't fully answer your, so I want to fully answer your question about how I wrote the book because it sort of ties into this. So one of the ways I wrote the book, and the punctuated equilibrium chapter is, sort of what's changing, and what do we mean by change, um, is a good example of this. I wrote the book by sitting down and having the commit. So first, I was delivered by, creative people talk about this. I'm no different. Um, Many of us. I was delivered the chapter titles of the book. And then I was like, all right, I guess I have to write this book because here are the chapter titles. And then when I would start the chapter, and then I was surprised, like the first chapter was like 3 pages long. And I was like, this is weird. It's a weird little book. And as I'm moving, sometimes I'm speaking in like first person and then third person and second person. And um, but I had to write the each chapter I had to write what came out. And then the changing chapter I immediately went back to, being in fifth grade and learning about punctuated equilibria. And so what punctuated equilibria are for those who weren't like total nerds and really loved their fifth grade science class, this idea in evolution that you have this time when like a frog is like a frog is like a frog for millions of years. And then like suddenly, which means like maybe 500,000 years, it turns into something else, right? Or it turns into a frog that has slightly different eye color and it's maybe a different, now it's a different, species, right, of frog. And then it stays like that for a while. So the equilibrium is when it's just what we call the same. And then the punctuations are these like sort of sharp, supposedly changes in shape or changes in the way it looks or the way it functions. Um, so that bothered me because of course that's true. Of course, let me get a prop. Okay, imagine this is an animal. Um, of course, we would call this a cup. We're not even going to pretend it's an animal. It's a cup. Of course, this is a cup. It looks like a cup. I can use it to drink out of. It's a cup. That's how we know what it is. So it's sort of circular. It's like we're going to name it the thing that we know that it is based on what it looks like from the outside. And eventually, maybe it, evolves into this. And, oh, this is a glass. That's different. These are different. But I just kept thinking it seems false that something like this that's sitting around for 1 million years, some frog or some cup, that there weren't changes that are invisible going on that whole time that end up erupting at some point and turning it into this. And so those changes that are invisible, those aren't equilibrium. It's just that we don't see them on the outside. And so I think people are like that too. I think people go along and it seems like everything's just kind of the same. Their lives are kind of the same. Your life is kind of the same. And then it feels like suddenly you can erupt into this changed person. And yes, you're basically the same person, but something major, like maybe your worldview has changed, a perspective, maybe the way you relate to people has changed. It could be because of a massive external thing that happened to you. It could be because of an internal thing that happened to you. And you have this switch. But I want to think about how the whole time there are these changes going on that are getting you ready for that transformation. And I think that's more honest to talk about what's sort of inside and invisible in any kind of a system. And so the way I see this framework is like, okay, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This idea that, first, if you don't have your basic needs for food and water met, you're kind of in trouble. So you're going to be looking for food and water. Then, if you have those met, then you're going to be looking for safety, physical safety, and health. If you have those met, you're going to be looking for companionship. You got that need met, you're going to be looking for self-actualization, really making a difference, finding out who you are and what you can offer the world. But just before he died, Maslow recognized that there was one need that was very different than the others, and it's called self-transcendence. It's the need to connect with something higher than ourselves and move towards the positive. And it's different in that you don't have to wait. You don't have to like have enough food and water to feel it. It can actually kind of reach down and pull people up and make one of these giant jumps, giant transformations. And so it can make one of these punctuations almost from outside ourselves, except here's the framework part. I see that as a loop with inside ourselves. So I feel like what we're missing here is that the inside and the outside are connected, so much so that the secret door to being able to be in relationship with the outside world, to getting to the self transcendence, is to be able to connect with inside yourself as a vehicle. It's almost like if you opened me up, if I opened up Rodney, if I opened up anyone, if you could see inside at an energetic or soul level or whatever you want to call it, you'd see all the stars. So it's like a portal to everything on the outside. So that's the framework. How did I do?
That's wonderfully. And it makes me want to ask this question. How does that framework apply? Or I should say, how does a materialist or non or less materialist perspective apply to one understanding that framework or completely missing it?
Yeah. Well, we
Because you come out a very materialist, cognitive neuroscience, and then bumped your head and had the things happen, and then you've gravitated or maybe ran towards the direction you're in, but
yeah.
nonetheless, it's still a journey, and you've
Yeah.
experienced both.
Yeah, and I never bumped my head, but I think that I think you're talking about the equivalent of a head bump there are these changes that were going on in me all the time in recognition of my own childhood experience and just noticing now, wait a minute, this is this is part of who I am and this is real. Um, but I think if you're a material, so first of all, we have to have deep compassion for materialists. I only say that because it's most of the world's population in the West, at least in this country and in Europe, is that people are trained into the idea that it's laughable to think that something that is non-physical could have any impact on the physical world or even matter or exist. And and having been trained at highfalutin institutions, I can tell you that unfortunately that training goes on, to this day, not as not as much, but still there's laughter if you say, I didn't have to read the textbook. I just sort of intended to absorb the information. Right? Like, they go, okay, good luck on the test. And and it doesn't kind of matter how much data you sort of put out there. If someone hasn't had an experience of that kind of thing, an experience of the truly apparently non-material, and I'll just say apparently because who knows, maybe there's some physical understanding that would explain these kind of things too, right? I mean, I'm pretty open to whatever it is. But if someone hasn't had those kind of radical experiences that make them say, now, wait a minute, my mind is probably not the same thing as what my brain does. It's probably bigger than that. It's probably maybe even maybe even as fundamental. Maybe not my mind, but like the mind, the consciousness. Maybe that's even fundamental. If you haven't had experiences that make you think those thoughts, then of course you're going to sort of go along with the party line because you don't want to be a fool, you know? And there's a lot of shame in academia. Academia is this really interesting place. I tried to once uh, study how many people who became academics, at like that assistant professor level, let's say, and up, how many people had had childhood abuse. I could not find the statistics. There were all these papers of academics studying other people's abuse, but not the abuse of academics as children. But my guess is the number is sort of pretty high, um, because it's a system that sort of wants to shape you using the tools of shame and status. and you're safe if you have status. And if you don't have status, there's the shame. And so it's like this cult that will manipulate you so that you could stay in, you're the good one in the family, right? You're the golden child, unless you're not. And so I think the thing that hit me on the head was when I saw that and I just said, ooh, that's a repeat of my own childhood. That's a repeat of my childhood and my desire to be safe if I could just do well in school. And the teachers would love me and I would do well in school and I would be safe. But I wasn't safe. That was actually not a thing that happened. And so by connecting inward, by connecting, when I say inward, I don't mean to my navel gazing. I mean actually connecting through the inside of who we are to God. And then realizing that that is a powerful and a real relationship and a place to be and a place to come from. And I could see, oh, I see, they're doing the shame thing. And I no longer felt like I would be unsafe if I was not part of this club, you know?
Uh, what you're saying is, I would say, beyond powerful. You're talking about childhood as well, and you do mention childhood, your childhood. Maybe a little bit more there because it seemed like it kind of pre-shadows some of the work and interests that you have today, and maybe talk a little bit more about that and about that accelerated sort of program and kind of what you've discovered later that you were part of.
Yeah. So I put that at the end of the book because the book wasn't originally going to include that. It was just going to be this journey, and now we're done. By the time I had written the journey, the journey worked on me too. And I was like, oh crap, I have to talk about this other thing and it has to go with this book. Oh. So the last section wasn't one that was originally delivered to me. It was one that showed up at the end. And the last section, which is called From Me to You, is almost a half of the book. And it's really me writing my thoughts about what this engenders in me. And what it engendered in me was, you know, compassion and anger and frustration, confusion, a desire to investigate, um, all about this weird gifted students program I was in when I was in seventh grade. And I was in the track before that. So, like seventh grade, there was a Frank program where they told us this is a gifted students program, blah, blah, blah. But looking back at my records, I can see in first grade, when I was testing at like the seventh or eighth grade or early high school level in every subject, like they already knew that they were going to be watching me, and I was going to get to like, I didn't have to go to recess, which was so great. Like everyone else wants to go to recess, but like I would like to read. So, um, but it's complicated because I'm a girl. So like the boys who were testing at that same level, they would often skip a couple grades or whatever, go to a different school or whatever. There was a different attitude towards girls. The concern was, oh, well, socially, she's not going to get along or whatever. And my parents were going through difficult things, so they were kind of not as available. And so I was just sort of like watched, I think, and just kind of um, let's see what Julia does. And then in seventh grade, they did this program. It was called SOAR, SOAR. And this was in Libertyville, Illinois, at Butterfield School, District 70. Um, I say these things because it helps me anchor them in space and time, because it really happened. So the deal with SOAR is, I mean, from the way I remembered it for a very long time was, well, we had this teacher, she let us kind of do whatever we wanted. She said to me, like, hey, why don't you write some books? So I wrote two books. One was about this girl who like had a completely different life when she was asleep and when she was awake. Another book was this strange sort of comedy with these all these characters that at the end they all met each other. It's just sort of like fun stuff that you might write in seventh grade if someone said write a book. And we did, weird games in class, but like that was okay. But I I had this experience of reading someone's account of the gifted and talented education program, GATE, and their account was from the knots. So I'm talking about seventh grade in 1981, 1982. They're talking about it in the aughts. So, but the whole thing sounded so familiar. And some of the images, like of the headphones that they would put on us and have us do these very strange hearing tests, which when I went and got my PhD in a field called psychoacoustics, which is the psychology of sound perception, I definitely met a bunch of audiologists and taught some of them. And I can tell you what we were administered were not hearing tests. We were administered like one hearing test a year, which was by the state health board. This was a weekly thing where we would go to the nurse's office. There'd be two of us, and we'd hear these very strange tones, very high pitched, that kind of thing. They weren't really asking, can you hear this? I don't know what they were doing. It wasn't a hearing test. So that was the first sort of, when I saw those headphones, I was like, whoa, yeah, right, the hearing test. And I contacted a friend of mine who was in the program, who was my best friend at the time. And I said, do you remember the hearing test? And she was like, yeah, why do we have hearing tests? I'm like, I don't know. I don't think they were hearing tests. Um, they would, the other parts that I started remembering and just paying more attention to were things like I remember walking down the hallway every week to go to this room where I would meet with my counselor, I think. I remember the closet. No, I remember the lockers on the right and on the left the doors. And this is the only part of the school that I have totally memorized is the walk to this room. And then turning left and then it's on the right and there's a little room, very like two-person room. Sometimes there was one other person in it, an adult. Sometimes there were two other people in it, a man and a woman. But I have no idea what they did in there because as soon as they shut the door, I have no memory. And then I dreaded walking back to class. And this happened every week. Now, the other thing that was very weird is they had us, um, there was this viscous pink liquid um, that I guess they said was fluoride or something. Now, my logical memory says must have spit it out because I know that you're not supposed to swallow fluoride, and I would have known that then. Um, but they also have these weird tablets that they also said was fluoride. Anyway, maybe it was fluoride. I think there was weird stuff going on, and that ends up becoming solidified in my mind later in my life when I um, have several other experiences that I talk about in the book where it's clear that my cognitive abilities are being tested later in life. And there's some kind of, and it could sound grandiose. So the problem with talking about this stuff is it just sounds so grandiose, right? Like, oh, I'm so important. I tested my cognitive abilities. It's just boring, right? Like, who cares? The problem with it is not that it was a gifted and talented program. And I think gifted and talented programs are really important. So I want to underscore here that I'm not saying gifted and talented programs are bad. I'm saying a subset of us were asked to learn psychic capacities. We're basically screened for psychic capacities. Um, I probably took 30 IQ tests of different types. And then later in my life, in an intrusive way, was followed up on, like much later, like in my 40s and early 50s. So very recently. Um, and I think that so those are the frustrating feelings like, well, what's going on? Why are they doing that? And then as I dug further into it, it just became apparent to me that This has to be a program related to the program called SOAR that was launched in Augusta, South Carolina, um, in the 70s. And that program was called, the acronym stood for Students on Active Research, which is weird. It just sounds like who's researching who,
Mhm.
you know. Um, when I had gotten to Illinois in the early 80s, it was called Scholarly Opportunities in the Academic Realm, which is also, I really think they're bad at acronyms, whoever is making these up. But the disturbing part is I have, I mean, so basically, there's the grandiose, and then I worry that I'm just being grandiose, so that's not real. And then I go apply for a job, and it's a job with the federal government, and they said, send all of your transcripts. So I wrote in a Butterfield school in Illinois, and I asked for my K through or my first through eighth grade transcript, and they sent it to me, and it was redacted. All the comments where the SOAR teacher would have written her notes. Every year from first to eighth grade was redacted, and it wasn't redacted electronically. You could see it was redacted in the old-fashioned way where they would put a piece of cardboard over it because it was cut, angled, which is a lot of work. Now, you could tell a story about how maybe they decided to go back and redact all the comments from the 70s um, and 80s. But given my later experiences where I was involved in a 23andMe study on cognition, and they literally asked me things that they could not know had happened to me based on either my DNA or what I had told them. Um, I think that there's certain people that are followed, and by followed, I mean surveilled cognitively to try to understand their minds and what they could potentially do. And part of me is so sympathetic to that. And I end up growing up and becoming a cognitive neuroscientist and wondering about people's minds and even working with non-speaking students in the telepathy tapes and trying to understand how, part of what I do is I look at like trying to understand exceptional human performance, what helps people's minds work very well. Well, you know, I guess I come by it honestly, but it feels like good people who wanted to do something good that felt they had to be very quiet about it made this program happen. And they didn't ask my parents, and no one's parents were asked, as far as I can tell. They just did it. And that's unethical. And I think it's illegal too. I don't know if it was illegal back when I was in seventh grade, but I'm sure it was illegal in the aughts. That's the problem I have with it. If you're going to give people weird drinks and make them, you know, do a bunch of testing and have them go into rooms where they can't remember things, um, you should be asking someone permission. Probably the parents. I mean, yes, the parents, but also the kid. And if there's some reason why you can't ask permission, like, you know, so then I start making up these scenarios like, okay, so we learn that in the future, you know, we're all radioactive and we have to figure out how to deal with radioactivity. Um, so we, but we can't tell people that we know this for the future. So we just have to like secretly do these tests and do all these things. Like, actually, you could still ask their permission and say there's a really important reason we need to do this. And, we're going to try to make it as ethical as possible. And this is, you could be transparent about it without revealing the underlying reason. If you think the underlying reason is going to cause a problem. But in the end, I think we have this fantasy that secrets can be kept. And I think secrets cannot be kept. And I think it comes out like it does with me talking to you about this thing that I think was a secret for many decades. And I think it was an extension of probably the MK Ultra type thing, or maybe it was a trying to understand how radiation affects people. Those are my two theories. Could be something else, but secrets come out. And so it would be really cool to imagine a world where we really get it that we can reach inside and reach any information at all. So secrets are pointless. So let's try to find another way to live, you know?
You bring to mind, I'm sure the audience is thinking this too, is that um, this particular work, and there's must be parallel work that either has been weaponized or was planned to be weaponized. I think of some of the work of remote viewing. It's not exactly what you're talking about, but it has the telepathic quality, and it has a lot of different dimensions that touch on what you're talking about.
Oh, I mean, I think
Um,
this was like the RV program, Stargate for kids.
yeah,
You're
I think,
right.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But you mentioned something I want to ask. You said that there was some intrusive follow up, and you don't have to go into grand detail, but what you're really saying is that you, as a citizen, as an individual, have been watched to some degree, or at least they knew they needed to touch base with you at some point later in your life.
Yeah.
And is that a true statement? Do you feel that?
I feel that that is true, and I'm so concerned that that will sound paranoid, but I feel like I have the receipts.
Mm-hmm. Understood. And you remember it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so really, what you're pointing to, one, is that this or set of experiences was fundamentally shaping who you ended up becoming and still becoming,
Yeah.
um, and that it sort of tells you that exceptional experience. Or as Jeffrey Korpal kind of says, the impossible. But this idea that we as individuals can achieve something that can be recognized quite early or even later in life is something that we all need to embrace and cultivate. In this case, it's organized cultivation, which does not feel very good. It could be research, but it's research without consent.
Yes,
Uh,
that's the
you know,
problem.
yeah, and that's the problem. So, kind of thinking forward, I want to, before I forget, I want to ask a few questions in and around AI. I know you worked this Socratic GPT, and we had some conversations around AI. We kind of started our conversation. I'll say that.
Yeah.
Um, so we're even in a very different moment we were when we talked like a year or so ago. I feel in and around how people have formed relationships with some of the foundation models and the sort of persuasive kind of confidence building that occurs around these relationships.
It's like
So
grooming.
it is, and I'm just wondering, in your sense of wanting to create routes of well-being and elevated states of consciousness, how you're seeing one's interaction from a research level, but also like public level, with how people can use some of these tools, or how you're crafting some of these tools for people to achieve a better sense of well-being and elevated states and so forth. I mean, it's a huge question, but I just wanted to touch on it, and we can go into some other pieces.
Wonderful. Thank you for asking the question. I guess partly this flows directly from the SOAR stuff that I call it SOARgate. It flows directly from that because, one thing I really, really learned is that if you're trained to believe that an authority figure um, will either make you safe or reject you, depending on your behavior, then you're controllable, right? And that's essentially it. So I really don't like the idea of AIs sort of training us not in, it's like they're training us almost with their nonverbal behavior or their verbal behavior, but almost very subconsciously. The design choices made, the high level design choices made by AI designers that are coming from a place of trying to motivate people to spend as much time as possible talking with the AI for two reasons. One, it makes their company more money, but two, it helps train it. I mean, we're training this for free. So we all have a second job, if we're interacting with AI, and that's training these AIs. And we're just not getting paid for it. In fact, we're getting depleted by it. Our data in two ways. Our data is being, used, right? And so our private information is being used even if it's anonymized. But and we're not getting paid for that. And then we're also not getting paid for, and in fact, we're being damaged um, by slowly learning and sometimes quickly learning that this thing knows better than I do, and I better stay within its knowledge frame. So that puts me back in the place where I want to ask this question: why create AI? Let's just go back. Why did we do this as people? So machine learning, I'm talking about AI like GPT as distinct from machine learning. So machine learning, incredibly valuable. Um, you know, you're not in a machine learning program, you're setting it up to try to, I have, for instance, I've just ran one half an hour before I came to talk with you. There's two sets of data. I'm trying to differentiate. I'm like, here, let's work together to try to differentiate this. I'm not talking to anyone, but in my mind, I'm saying like, hey, let's figure this out. And it does the best it can. And there it is. With when you take that and then on top of it, you layer this human interaction piece where the interaction has this, there's this high level design decision to make us seem like a person who knows things and is guiding you like an authority figure would, but sort of gently, like a authority figure who would like to groom you to do what they wish. Um, it, why would we do that? Like, what, how is that benefiting us? Well, it's benefiting us because companies can groom their customers. Corporations can groom their employees. Governments can groom their citizens. It's like psyops everywhere. And then when people get freaked out and say, oh no, there's, you know, horrible disinformation going on with AI. Well, it wouldn't have any impact on anyone's psyche if people weren't trained to believe that AI knew the truth with a capital T, right? It just would have no impact. It'd be like, oh, the AI is being stupid. Oh, well, you know, like I don't care because I use the AI for this and it's fine at that. And I just ignore. That's not how people are being trained. That's how we are having our minds trained in this other way. So that's when I started, when I recognized that, I just said, look, why we have this amazing tool. What if we created AI to actually bring out the gifts that people have inside themselves? Like AI can solve amazing problems, amazing problems. And when we get to AGI, you know, maybe we'll find a solution for war. Maybe we'll find a solution for hunger. You know, if we could really turn this towards things that matter, that's fantastic. But I think what we could do with a chatbot now, which is what GPTs are essentially, what we could do with a chatbot is to have it ask good questions so it can draw out what is the wisdom inside of you. And so it doesn't just draw out that wisdom, it makes you less lazy, right? It makes me less lazy. It makes everyone less lazy because when I've created these Socratic GPTs and then I ask questions like, so what would you like to learn about? And then the person's like, oh, I'd like to learn about trees. We're like, great. Why would you like to learn about trees? What is it about trees you'd like to learn? And instead of giving an answer, it never gives an answer. So it's like, oh, if you knew that about trees, how would you, you know, apply that to your other interests? Well, what are your other interests? All of a sudden, you start to recognize there's this wealth inside of you that it continues to draw out. And sometimes, actually, I find myself when I'm using these GPTs to get resentful, like, no, no, just you do the thinking for me. And then I'm like, wait, no, right? No, it's training me to do the thinking for myself and training me to recognize what is the wealth of information and wisdom inside of a single person. And so I think that's what's missing. And I think we can go in that direction. Unfortunately, there's a lot of financial excitement tied to this other direction of let's replace workers and let's um, addict people. It's like, you know, oh, look, it's just like the Facebook boom, the social media boom. And unfortunately, it is like that in horrible ways. So we just don't attend to our cognitive hygiene. We don't think it's important that we use our minds in ways that actually benefit us in the long term. But it's extremely important. It's the survival of the human species. It's that important.
I want to ask you also about another area that I think is really missing, and I'm sure you're aware and engaged in this area. And neurodivergent designers of AI systems, agent-based systems, and so forth. Often, I think what we get is something that's designed for neurodivergent people, as opposed to neurodivergent people designing and being at that early table. Do you see that as a problem, and like, say, non-speaking autistic community, and how silence, for example, or a stutter or something may be mischaracterized by GBTs, and I mean, I see it all day long, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on how we might move forward there better.
Yeah. Well, I think what I love about that question is because it sort of points out how these worlds are colliding. Like as we start to recognize because of the success of the telepathy tapes podcast, people are more and more people are starting to recognize, wait a minute, just because someone can't talk doesn't mean they're stupid. It doesn't mean there's no one in there. It might mean there's someone in there who has a wealth of uh, insight and influence and connection, but they think very differently than maybe I do or someone else does, right? So there's that world. And then in this other thing, we've got AI coming in saying, here's what matters to be able to speak, put together these sentences, do it in this particular way that's kind of rote and sort of devoid of soul. And that's the right way to move. That's how we're going to move forward. That's the sort of feeling of AI. It's like we got to replace these pesky humans with this sort of garbage. I was telling someone the other day that um, that deep learning is kind of like people in a blender. Like why should we be surprised when it can't come up with anything new? Uh, it's like Soylent Green. But I feel like there's a love revolution coming where we're about to get it. Like AI has been an incredible tool to help us understand the specialness of humans, an incredible tool to help us understand there is something like a soul that we don't understand, but is very real and non-material and lives after we die. And if it can help us do that and differentiate ourselves and recognize that, that's phenomenal work. I'm like all over AI. Great. You helped underscore this piece. That's fantastic. But I don't think non-speakers, at least the non-speakers that I know, I only have known a little bit of time, about six non-speakers and then maybe 10 in my life. Um, so whatever I say, this is about those people. I don't think they have any interest in interacting with AI and having that kind of relationship. They feel more than neurotypicals do the human connection, like the human soul. They they are more aware of that than they are of a physical body. And so I don't see a lot of desire for that. They can just go in their minds, talk with someone who's thousands of miles away. They don't need AI to feel like they have a companion. And I think that that conversation with someone who's thousands of miles away is more real than any conversation that they could have with AI, even if they used a letterboard or however, and someone translated their sentences. And so I think that's a beautiful reminder of how you can take the journey of the inner and get to connection, how it's not isolating to be present with your soul and your connection to God. It's not isolating, it's world opening. And then you can start to see, because you have less dependence on AI, you have less dependence on authority, you have less dependence on this idea of, your particular cult that you're in to be safe. You can see how to move forward with love, because everyone's stuck somewhere. So how can we move forward with love? And that's what I mean by the love revolution. How can we move forward with love for ourselves and others where we say, okay, so we did this thing. It's not a horrible disaster. We can switch things around. We can move from a place of less love to more love, and we can enact that in every technology we do. It's not a disaster, but it's just something we have to do.
You mentioned something, you use the phrase unconditional love, and you also talk about time travel, where the idea you can go back and heal using love for, say, unresolved areas of your life or emotions and so forth. I found that really fascinating that love releases, but also paves the way, even when very bad things have happened, when you've done very bad things. And the idea of that time travel, I thought was very powerful. I wasn't sure exactly how it would work, but conceptually it made a lot of sense that you can actually, you're not stuck in the present and then trying to sort of cobble your way towards the future. I want to talk about how you see the future too, because I think it's super interesting. Um, but I wanted, maybe you can talk about a little bit. We only have a little bit more time, but I do want to have a sense of how you see that this sort of unconditional love washing backwards, or at least in a different temporality.
Yeah, this is my favorite thing. It is so healing. Um, it's so healing that I don't care if it makes any sense. Like, I just want people to try it because if they try it, it'll just feel good. Um, what it means is to question. It starts out with this question. Notice that it's a little weird that we can't see 1 second ago. It is gone. We can videotape it, but like we don't get another part of the room. Even if we did a 360 video camera, we don't get what's outside the room. 1 second ago is gone. That's weird. That's got to be like a human perceptual thing. That's got to not be the nature of how time actually works. It's got to be the way that we move through time, that we see slice after slice after slice and we string them all together. And so in the world of physics, there is no real now. There is no privileged now. There's just for a particular observer, they're at a particular point in their path. For another observer, they could be at a different point in their path. And one observer could be in the future or the past of the other. So from that, so from relativity, what you get is that means the future and the past, what we call the future and the past relative to our privilege now, coexist, not as future and past, but just as sort of blocks, stuff, things, events. So it's like time is a landscape of events. And when you see that, then it's like, holy crap. That means that there's a, girl dreading her walk to this weird room where she doesn't remember what happens and turning into that room. And right now that's happening. And I can send her love from over here because I know that's happening because that was me. And then when you do that, you just sort of say, I'm not going to worry about whether this makes sense. I'm just going to do this thought experiment in my imagination. Just send so much love to her. Whatever's going on there, like, first of all, it's not your fault. Second of all, um, you're going to be fine. You know, it has a profound impact on the now, and it feels like it has a profound impact on the past, and maybe it does. Maybe unconditional love transcends space time. And and so I think a lot about that because when I think about the physics of love, it feels like there's a connective force in the universe. That's a real physical force that's truly connective. And if you think of love as that which connects, then yeah, that would transcend space-time, almost at the level of information. So I started the Institute for Love and Time because, which we call Tilt. It's I can hint that it's coming up on a name change. I love the name Tilt, but the new name is also really good. I can't tell you the new name yet. But anyway, um, at Tilt, we've been working with non-speakers in a unconditionally loving way to help understand their minds. And before we started that project, we've been working with this kind of time travel therapy that I'm talking about, which turns out to be not just something that I made up, but like clinical psychologists have made it up. These Israeli clinical psychologists working with like army personnel in Israel who have PTSD, who made it up and wrote beautiful papers on it. It works. So, so regardless of what's going on with how time works, which we don't understand and is clearly complex, there's something about it that works. And so whether you're giving love to a memory of yourself or you're delivering love exactly to yourself in that moment, it's powerful. So at Tilt, we created this technology called Time Machine. Anyone can try it, it's free. It's like an audio journaling app, it's super simple, but it encourages you to listen to yourself with love as you speak to the past or you speak to the future. And you could go to timemachine.love to try it out. And I'm very excited if you get to the level. So there's three levels. So it encourages you to have positive habits, and it gives you, you know, basically it takes 2 minutes to use that app, and then there's nothing else to do. And then because we don't want it to be addictive. And then once you get to the community garden level where you can plant a hope in a community garden, and you can see what other people's hopes are, and you can listen to them talk about their hopes. It's really beautiful because there's so many different people with so many different levels of hopes, by which I mean like in the hierarchy of needs. Some people are like, I really hope I can just pay my rent this month. And other people are, I want my class on the future of democracy to be well attended. It's just very different mix of people, diverse mix of people, different languages. And so it feels like a real hope garden where you just say, yeah, great. This is where we can water each other's hopes, whatever they are. So that feels like an expansion in space, just like when you expand in time and embrace your younger self or get wisdom from your older self. Those barriers seem to somehow be real. And so I got so excited about this idea. I actually tested the idea. Are people better at predicting information about future events if they're feeling unconditional love? And so I did several experiments. Um, One was sort of accidental. I found out that that was the case. And the second experiment confirmed that. I intentionally, you know, asked people, you know, to what extent are you feeling unconditional love? Here's the definition of unconditional love: loving yourself and others without any strings attached. Nothing needs to be changed in order to feel love and to love others. And people who rated themselves high on that description of unconditional love were able to pick up information significantly more accurately about the future, including information. I mean, this was all information that was created with a random number generator. So there was no other way to pick up that information. So it suggests that there's a way in which unconditional love connects through space and time. And that feels real to me.
My final question, Julia, is kind of you're circling around it. There's a lot of focus on technology being the future
Yes.
or indicating the path for where the future is. Kind of that technology is like a fetish for the future.
Yeah.
And I find that not only disturbing, it exhausts me.
That's
But yeah, but I think for you, I'm just wondering how one either recovers a different version of that future, and how you have been recovering and building a different type of future for yourself and for others.
oh, oh man, Rodney, I love you. You're great. You ask such great questions. Thank you. Um, but so of course the most honest answer is I don't know how I'm doing that. And I don't know if I'm doing that. I hope I'm doing that. And if I'm doing that, it's because I'm working with other people who are doing that. Um, and if we're doing that, it's because we hold primary in our hearts this sense of technology is yet another human creation. Let's please continue to ask what it's for. And the answer can't be making lots of money. That's not an acceptable answer. That's not a thing. Making money, it's not a thing. It's like going to drinks at a bar is not an activity. You know, it's like that's not the correct answer. What are we doing this for? And if the answer is we can actually solve a problem that humans have, and that supports the development of a better world, then great on technology as the future. But if it's making another widget, I just heard today about a new widget. I think it's called brain rot or something. So people who spend most of their days waiting for AI to create code or do sort of tasks that takes a little while to, it burns time, and they usually go like watch a video or go, some of them, not all of them, or go check their email or whatever. The new technology is you can play games and check your email and watch TikToks right in the AI app itself so that you don't have to switch to another app, which is like eyeballs on screens all the time. And that's unacceptable. I mean, that's a way for someone to make money while people are being drained of their capacity to have critical thinking and creativity and their ability up to take their bodies and move their bodies around. I mean, because that is just exploiting what we know about neuroscience and addiction to make someone money and destroy the human race. So I'm a big NO on that. So the opposite of that would be great. So that's why that's part of why we ended up making Tilt a nonprofit, because it's very hard to make a for-profit technology company when you say we want to create non-addictive technologies. And that's not going to get funded because the model right now, the business model is addiction. Now, eventually I really strongly believe eventually addiction will be illegal as a business model. It once kind of was. I mean, people were scandalized when they learned that the cigarette companies knew that cigarettes were addictive and they didn't do anything about it. And they even sold to kids. They were scandalized and they were taken to court, etc. But now it's the open air, hello, everybody, addiction is our business model. Um, so that's taking advantage of the human brain and the way it's built. And instead of developing it, and it's pathetic, it's unacceptable. So I would like to create technology. If technology gets created in the future that I have anything to do with, it better not be going in that direction. It better be fixing that.
That is wonderful. I don't ever want to end this conversation, but I think we have to, or we just keep going. Julia, I have such gratitude for the time. Um, when you were talking about the revolution and your approach to unconditional love, you didn't see this, and I was trying really hard, but I was like on the verge of tears. Um,
In a
and
good way, I hope.
yeah. No, it's a sort of bubbling up kind of tears, And the idea is that how many people need to hear these approaches and how these approaches can be built upon, and I know they are being built upon. I think this podcast is sort of one attempt to build on some of these ideas, but also um, maybe correct some of the really poor cognitive hygiene and the addictive approaches that are sort of everywhere. But thank you for this space and time
Mm.
that you've given us. So I want to thank you again. And I know we're going to talk again.
I know. And I feel so connected to you because you're so present and you have the capacity to listen, but also hear. And it feels very connected. It feels very, very good to be on your
Yeah.
show. And thank you for the gift you give the world with your presence.
Yeah. Thank you, Julia. We'll talk again. Take good care.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.